I'm going to tell you a story about patience. I'm going to tell you about the kind of cold, quiet anger that sits in your chest like a stone for 5 years, waiting for the exact right moment to be thrown. You might listen to this and think I'm cruel. You might think I should have been the bigger person, that I should have let bygones be bygones. But I need you to understand something fundamental before we begin. Forgiveness is a luxury you can only afford when the other side has actually stopped swinging the knife. My family never stopped swinging. They just forgot I was a target for a while. 5 years ago, I walked out of a sprawling, manicured estate in the hills of Connecticut. I was 22 years old. I didn't leave for a prestigious university or a nepotism-fueled internship. I left to get away from them, to get away from the suffocating pressure of being a Blackwood. See, my family is what you call optical illusion wealth. To the outside world, we were American royalty. My father, Richard, was a high-end real estate developer, the kind of man whose handshake was supposed to be worth millions. My mother, Catherine, ran a high society art consultancy and chaired half the charity galas in the state. My older brother, Preston, was a golden boy, an investment banker on Wall Street who wore three-piece suits to Sunday brunch. And my younger sister, Bella, was a family jewel, an influencer and socialite who was currently engaged to the heir of a shipping fortune. And then there was me, Ethan, the glitch in the Matrix. I didn't care about galas. I didn't care about the country club hierarchy. I wanted to build things, specifically digital things. When I told them I was moving to the West Coast to work in network infrastructure, essentially, the plumbing of the internet, the reaction wasn't just disappointment. It was venomous. I remember standing in the marble foyer, my duffel bag over my shoulder. Richard looked at me over the rim of his scotch glass and laughed. He told me I was destined to be a digital janitor, scrubbing servers for people who actually mattered. Catherine, my mother, refused to even look at me. She told the room that I was spitting on the family legacy to go play with wires. Preston called me a loser who couldn't hack it in the real business world. Bella just wrinkled her nose and asked if I'd be able to afford soap where I was going. They made me feel small. They made me feel like dirt. And I took that feeling, packed it into my bag, and drove 3,000 miles without looking back. 4 or 5 years, I was a ghost. I didn't go home for Christmas. I didn't call on birthdays. When Catherine texted me once in the second year, a vague, passive-aggressive message asking if I was still playing with computers, I sent a simple yes and nothing else. They stopped trying after that. But I was busy. I wasn't just playing with computers. I was obsessively mastering the architecture of information. I started in a help desk role, sure, but I worked 18-hour days. I learned cloud architecture, penetration testing, and forensic data analysis. I moved from support to engineering, then to security consulting. By year 3, I was a senior systems architect. By year 4, I had founded my own boutique cybersecurity firm specializing in corporate risk assessment. By year 5, I had sold that firm's proprietary software to a defense contractor for a sum that would have made my father choke on his scotch. I was wealthy, independently, quietly liquid wealthy. I owned a modern glass and steel home overlooking the Pacific Ocean. I had zero debt. I had a portfolio that was bulletproof. And my family, they had no idea. To them, I was still the failure, the digital janitor. I watched them from afar, monitoring their public social media profiles. Preston's lavish vacations, Bella's engagement parties, my parents' endless galas. They looked perfect. But in my line of work, you learn that nothing is ever as perfect as it looks on the surface. You learn to look for the cracks. Last month, I decided it was time to test the waters. I hadn't planned on revenge yet. I just want to see if 5 years had softened them. I wanted to see if, perhaps, my absence had made them realize that a son and brother was worth more than his job title. I flew back east. I rented a modest sedan, nothing flashy, and drove to the family estate. It was a Tuesday afternoon. The house looked exactly the same. Imposing, white column, terrified of appearing imperfect. I parked in the driveway and walked to the door. My heart was hammering, not out of fear, but out of a strange, nostalgic dread. I rang the bell. Catherine answered. It took her a moment to place me. She blinked, her face tight with Botox, and then her eyes narrowed. There was no hug. No, oh my God, you're home. Ethan, she said, her voice dripping with disdain. Did you run out of money? We aren't a homeless shelter. That was the greeting. I didn't say anything. I just stood there. Richard appeared behind her, wearing a silk robe. Well, look who it is, he boomed, a cruel smile playing on his lips. The prodigal janitor returns. Did you come to fix the Wi-Fi? It's been a bit spotty in the East Wing. Then Preston walked out, holding his phone. He saw me and immediately started recording. Guys, say hi to the family charity case. Ethan's back from the coast. Look at those shoes. What are those Target brand? They weren't. They were Italian leather, handmade, worth more than his suit. But they didn't have logos, so he couldn't tell. Bella came down the stairs, saw the commotion, and laughed. Oh my God! Don't let the neighbors see him. Tell him to go around to the service entrance. They stood there in the doorway. My mother, father, brother, and sister, a wall of mockery. Richard reached into his pocket, pulled out a $20 bill, and crumpled it up. He threw it at my chest. It bounced off me and landed on the doormat. Go get yourself a hot meal, son, Richard said. And maybe a haircut. You look like you've been sleeping in a server room. They laughed. All of them. A deep, belly-shaking laughter that echoed off the marble floors. I looked at the crumpled bill. I looked at their faces. And in that moment, something clicked. The stone in my chest didn't get heavier. It shattered. I realized I wasn't looking at family. I was looking at targets. I didn't speak. I didn't scream. I just nodded, turned around, and walked back to my rental car. As I drove away, my phone buzzed. Preston had posted the video to his Instagram story. Look what the cat dragged in. The caption read, begging at the door. Sad. I saved the video. I archived it locally. Then I drove to a hotel, opened my laptop, and initiated the protocol I had been subconsciously designing for half a decade. I didn't go home immediately. I stayed in a hotel in the next town over for 3 days. I turned my hotel room into a command center. You see, my family operates on the assumption that money and status shield them from scrutiny. But in the digital age, everything leaves a trace. Every loan, every lien, every credit check, every exaggerated claim. I started digging, not hacking. I want to be very clear. I did not break a single law. I used open source intelligence, OSINT techniques. I accessed public property records, court filings, UCC filings for business loans, and cross-referenced them with industry gossip and social media geotags. What I found was a house of cards, so fragile a breeze could knock it over. Let's start with Richard, my father, the titan of industry. Public records showed that his development firm hadn't broken ground on a new project in 4 years. He was sustaining his lifestyle by refinancing the commercial properties he already owned, pulling equity out to pay the interest on previous loans. It was a Ponzi scheme of one. He was technically insolvent, living on bank credit that was contingent on property values that were currently plummeting. Then Catherine, her art consultancy. I pulled the non-profit filings for the charities she worked with. Her consulting fees were massive, bleeding the charities dry, but her actual gallery hadn't sold a significant piece in 18 months. She was borrowing money from her father, my grandfather, Silas, to pay the lease on the gallery space to keep up appearances. Preston, the investment banker. I found a lawsuit filed in civil court 2 counties over. He was being sued for breach of contract on a private loan. He had leveraged himself to the hilt to buy into a partnership, but the buy-in was fake. He was drowning in consumer debt, leasing a Porsche he couldn't afford, and effectively living paycheck to paycheck on a salary that was a fraction of what he claimed. And Bella, her engagement to the shipping heir? I did a deep dive on the fiancé's family. They were old money, conservative, the kind of family that runs background checks on the people entering their circle. They valued discretion and financial prudence above all else. They had no idea they were marrying into a family of grifters. They were all broke, every single one of them. They were floating on a sea of debt, buoyancy provided solely by the reputation they had built 30 years ago. And I I was the iceberg. I started with the most vulnerable point, Catherine's vanity. My mother's entire self-worth is tied to her gallery. It's not a business, it's a stage. She needs the wealthy matrons of the town to envy her taste. I made 3 phone calls. I didn't call her. I called people I knew in the art insurance world. Through my business, I had secured the digital assets of several major insurance underwriters. I had contacts. I called a senior underwriter who specialized in fine art. I mentioned casually that I had heard rumors about the provenance of some pieces in a certain gallery in Connecticut. I didn't say they were fake. I just said the documentation seemed sparse. In the art world, doubt is as good as a death sentence. Then I called a private collector I knew in New York, a man who had bought from my mother in the past. I asked him if he had ever received the authentication certificates for his purchase. He realized he hadn't. Within 48 hours, the whisper campaign began. It wasn't loud. It was a low hum. Have you heard about Catherine's inventory? People are asking questions. The following Tuesday, Catherine's biggest client canceled a 6-figure acquisition. On Wednesday, the insurance adjuster showed up for a surprise audit of her inventory. My phone rang on Thursday. It was Catherine. I let it go to voicemail. Ethan, are you still in town? I heard you were asking questions about the gallery. I don't know who you think you are, but you need to stop spreading lies. You're embarrassing us. She sounded nervous. The arrogance was there, but it was brittle. Next was Richard. Real estate is all about confidence. Lenders lend because they believe the developer is solvent. If that confidence wavers, the credit line snaps shut. I knew Richard was in the middle of renegotiating a massive balloon payment on his commercial portfolio. He needed the bank to believe his occupancy rates were 95%. I knew, from analyzing utility usage data available in public municipal reports, that his occupancy was closer to 60%. I didn't call the bank. That would be interference. Instead, I compiled a report. A simple market analysis of commercial real estate in a specific district, highlighting the discrepancies between claimed occupancy and utility-verified occupancy. I published this report on a niche but highly respected real estate investment blog under pseudonym. I then emailed the link to the risk management officers of the 3 regional banks that held Richard's debt. I simply asked, is this data accurate for your risk models? Bankers are paranoid creatures. When they see data that suggests they are holding bad debt, they panic. 2 days later, my father's phone must have started ringing off the hook. I know this because he called me. Boy, he growled into my voicemail. I don't know what you're doing or who you're talking to, but I have auditors crawling up my ass. If you have something to do with this, I will sue you into oblivion. He was scared. He had never been audited in his life. He was used to handshakes and scotch. He wasn't ready for data forensics. Preston was the easiest. Preston had posted that video of me. He wanted the world to see me as a failure. So, I decided to let the world see him. I found the docket number for his civil lawsuit regarding the unpaid debt. It was public record, but no one looks at civil court filings unless they have a reason to. I sent an anonymous tip to the compliance department of his investment firm. Investment bankers have strict rules about personal insolvency. You cannot manage other people's money if you cannot manage your own. It's a massive regulatory red flag. I simply sent the docket number and a screenshot of his Instagram where he was flashing a Rolex that I knew, from the filing, was purchased on credit he was defaulting on. Compliance risk was the subject line. Preston was placed on administrative leave pending an internal investigation within 24 hours. Then came the wild card. My grandfather, Silas. Silas was the only one I respected. He was a hard man, a steel magnate from the old school, but he valued honesty. He had been bankrolling my mother and father for years, likely under guise that it was investment rather than charity. He called me a week after my visit. Ethan, his voice was gravel. Meet me, the club, noon. I debated not going. But Silas was smart. If anyone could figure out I was the architect of this chaos, it was him. I met him at his private club. It smelled of old leather and cigar smoke. He was sitting by the fireplace, looking frail but sharp-eyed. "You've been busy," he said, not looking at me. He was watching the flames. "I don't know what you mean, Silas," I said, sitting opposite him. He chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. "Don't insult me. The audit on the gallery. The bank looking into Richard's occupancy rates. Preston getting suspended. This has your fingerprints all over it. It's precise. It's systemic." He turned to look at me. "Why?" I pulled out my phone. I didn't say a word. I just played the video Preston had posted. The video of them throwing money at me. The video of the mockery. Silas watched it. His jaw tightened. He watched Richard throw the money. He watched Catherine sneer. "I left 5 years ago," I said softly. "I built a life. A successful one. I came back to see if they were human. They show me they aren't." Silas handed the phone back. He took a sip of his whiskey. "They told me you came back begging for money. They told me you were homeless." "I sold my company last year for 8 figures, Silas." I said, "I don't need their money. I just wanted a family." Silas stared at me for a long time. Then he sighed. It was a sigh of a man who realizes his legacy is rot. "I've been pouring money into Richard's business for a decade," Silas admitted. "And the gallery. I thought I was helping them build something. But you're telling me it's all smoke." "It's a Ponzi scheme, Silas. And you're the mark." Silas nodded slowly. He didn't get angry. He got cold. "I worked 40 years in the mills to build this family's name. If they are tarnishing with lies, then they don't deserve the shield." He looked me in the eye. "Finish it." With Silas withdrawing protection, the floodgates opened. Silas called Catherine that afternoon and informed her he was cutting off the monthly stipend for the gallery lease. Without that cash flow, she couldn't make payroll. She had to fire her staff the next day. The news hit the local gossip columns immediately. Blackwood Gallery implodes. The auditors finished with Richard. They found the discrepancies. The bank called in the loans. Because the property values had dropped, he was underwater. They initiated foreclosure proceedings on his commercial holdings, and by extension, the family estate, which he had foolishly used as collateral. Preston was fired. His firm didn't want the liability. He was walked out of the building by security. And Bella? I didn't have to do anything to Bella directly. Her fiancé's family did it for me. When the news of the foreclosure and the fraud investigation into Richard broke, the shipping heir family pulled the ripcord. They called off the engagement, citing irreconcilable differences in values. The wedding was off. The social standing was gone. The money was gone. Last Saturday, my Aunt Renee, the only neutral party in the family, called me. She was crying. She said there was going to be a family meeting and begged me to come. She said they were desperate and didn't understand what was happening. I agreed to meet them, but not at the house. I chose a neutral location, a conference room at the high-end hotel where I was staying. I walked in at 2 p.m. They were all there. They looked like refugees from a lifestyle magazine. Richard was unshaven. Catherine's eyes were red-rimmed. Preston looked like he hadn't slept in a week. Bella was staring at the table. When I walked in, the silence was heavy. "Ethan," Richard started, his voice shaking. We need to talk." I sat down at the head of the table. "Talk. We know you're doing this." Preston spat out, though it lacked his usual venom. "We know you talked to the banks. We know you talked to the compliance board." "I didn't lie to anyone," I said calmly. "I just provided data. If the truth destroyed your lives, that's not my fault. That's yours." "We're losing the house," Catherine whispered. "Ethan, we are losing the house. Your father is going to be investigated for fraud. Bella's wedding is canceled." "I know," I said. "How can you be so cold?" Bella screamed, tears streaming down her face. "We're your family." "Family?" I stood up. "Family doesn't throw money at their son like he's a prostitute. Family doesn't film their brother's humiliation for likes. Family doesn't erase someone for 5 years because their job title isn't fancy enough." I leaned over the table. "You call me a janitor. You were right. I am a janitor. And I'm finally taking out the trash." Richard slammed his hand on the table. "I am your father. You owe us." "I owe you nothing." I shouted back, my voice echoing off the walls. I built my life from scratch while you played pretend with Silas's money. And now that the money is gone, you want to save you? You want the failure to bail you out? They went silent. They realized, finally, the shift in power. I have the means to stop the foreclosure, I said softly. Their heads snapped up. Hope, it's a cruel thing. I could write a check today that would clear Richard's debt. I could recapitalize the gallery. I could pay off Preston's loans. Please, Catherine sobbed. Please, Ethan. We're sorry. We were wrong. Just help us. I thought about it, I said. I really did. But then I remembered the bus fare you gave me. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a crisp $20 bill. I tossed it onto the table. It slid across the polished wood and stopped in front of Richard. Use that for a moving van, I said. I walked out of the room. I could hear Catherine screaming my name as the door closed. That brings us to last night. I was in my rental house, a nice, secluded place on the edge of town. It was raining. My security app pinged. Motion at the front gate. I pulled up the feed on my iPad. It was them. All four of them. They were standing in the rain outside my gate. Richard was holding an umbrella over Catherine. Preston and Bella were shivering. They looked small. They looked pathetic. Catherine was pressing the intercom button repeatedly. Ethan, please. Her voice crackled through the speaker, distorted by the static in the rain. We have nowhere to go. The bank locked the doors today. Please let us in. We're family. I sat in my living room, a warm cup of tea in my hand, watching the screen. Richard took the mic. Son, listen to me. We can work this out. I can make you a partner. We can rebuild. A partner. In a ruin. The delusion was terminal. Kyle, sorry, Preston. Stepped up. Ethan, stop being a psycho. Open the gate. It's freezing out here. I watched them for 20 minutes. I watched the rain soak their expensive clothes. I watched the realization set in that the gate wasn't going to open. I could have felt guilty. I searched my heart for it. Truly. But all I found was a profound sense of balance. The scales had finally tipped. They had spent my entire life teaching me that status was everything, that money was the only measure of a man, and that those without it deserved to be on the outside looking in. I was simply respecting their teachings. Eventually, the headlights of an Uber appeared. They piled into a Honda Civic, a car they wouldn't have been caught dead in a month ago, and drove away into the night. I turned off the iPad. The silence in the house was beautiful. I'm flying back to the West Coast tomorrow. I have a business to run. I have a life to live. As for Blackwoods, they'll figure it out. Or they won't. People like them usually find a new host to attach themselves to. But they will never feed on me again. The janitor has finished his shift. The building is clean. And I am finally, truly going home.